and the feeling together. Right, so now back to where we were. We saw that the shoiv, which is a much harder form of Avodah, the Ikar was mitzad Gilui Elyon, and that was mitzad what we saw, the Re'iyah de Chochmah. And Re'iyah de Chochmah is the shleimus, the highest of all the madrigas that can be reached in Chochmah, and it's not seichel at all, because Chochmah Beklal is prior to usual seichel, even though it's lower madrigas. How much more so in this madriga of Re'iyah, it's a type of Re'iyah Samahus, it's a form of seeing the very essence of the matter. And so that is poyach on the mensch, it's not his koyach, but that's a koyach eloki, which he's had the schus to reach, and that's poyach in him, and it brings with it the recognition of the Ikar Kavanah Pnimiyas, and the Kavanah Klolis of the Eibishter, in Brias Visavas or Ilamas, and in sending the Shomas Lamata, that has to be Davki Kiyum Matera Mitzvahs, Be Kabbalah Seo Malchus Shemayim Lamata in the world. And we saw that was Be'ikar poiled through the Re'iyah and through the Oyer Elyon. However, we saw that both prior to that, or both after that, and even prior to that, there had to be the Avodah B'Koyach Atzmai. We couldn't really define that as Koyach Atzmai, because it comes Be'ikar from having seen, that the seeing of the Mahus of Elokus, and the Mahus of Elokus has an effect on him. But prior to that, he had to work very hard, and we're going to deal with that more now in the coming pieces, that in order for him to reach Re'iyah de Chochmah, and to have the schus, as we've called it, to be zeiche to that gilui of Re'iyah in the Koyach HaChochmah. It's a very elevated and perfect madrega within the level of Koyach HaChochmah, that he had to work a lot previous. He had to be making himself in Avodah, B'tfilah, and Avodah in general, the purification of his soul, and in grasping Elokus and being Rizbainan in such a way that he would come to Ava V'yira. And we saw that all those are in the Koyach of the Adam himself. Ki, on page Kufnun, about 6 or 7 lines down from the top, Tzrichim Lishchois Lebechinas Re'iyah de Chochmah. You have to have a schus. And the way you come to that schus, the way you are zeicha to Re'iyah, is first of all having done everything you can with your own Yigiyah in Avodah Pnimius Banefesh to awaken the union of his asoga, his understanding, and coming to deep reflection on what he understood, and through that awakening Ava V'yira in his nefesh. And that's the way that you are zeiche eventually to Re'iyah de Chochmah, meaning that in a certain extent Re'iyah de Chochmah is like a gift. It's like something you reach, but it's not perfectly within your own, it's not purely within your own koyach. However, if you didn't make all these preparations beforehand, then there's no hope that you're going to be zeiche to Re'iyah de Chochmah. V'hainu alideh avodah v'yigiyah tefillah b'asoga v'izbonenes, through, at the beginning, the effort and hard work and struggle in grasping Elokus as much as is possible for him to understand, his boneness and reflecting on what he understood, his dachachas nafshoi, and the purification and the edling out, as you might say, as it's called in Yiddish, oisedlan, nafshoi be'ava v'yira. In other words, at the etzem fact that a Yid comes to Ava before Elokus and Yira, and he fears the Eibshter, that purifies him, that causes in him a purification, even though it may not be the highest form of Ava Yira because it's come through his own effort, but that's what purifies and as you might call, takes away all the dust and the unnecessary things in the nefesh, because the nefesh becomes involved in Elokus and in feeling enthusiasm and bittul Elokus. Oz Harehu Zeicher Lebchines Ria de Chochma. Dafke Alidizeh, you have the schus to come to the union of the Ria of Chochma. Bekam etzem Beginnes Haria de Eina Seichu Hu Alidei Yegia. So he said that not only by preparation of the soul in Ava V'yira, what that's Avodas Hashem and Avodas Atfila in general, but in the etzem usage of the mind and the seichel, then you go up through different levels, and through the hard work in those levels, then you come to the inyan of Ria de Chochma, which we call Ria of Ein HaSeichel, the seeing of the eye of the mind. And that is also through Yegia. Sure? So we see that we've now reached a conclusion that there are two forms of Yegia which surround the Ria de Chochma in the middle. First of all, as we saw just here, that you have to prepare yourself with a lot of Aveda and a lot of struggle gradually to be Zeicha to Ria de Chochma. And that's in Aveda Beklal, and particularly inside the Inyan HaSeichel itself, through a lot of effort, as we'll soon see more about that as we go along now. And then we saw that he's Zeicha to Ria de Chochma, and that causes in him a Inyan for Shoiv, Davke. And then we saw that brought a necessity of a new form of Yegia, to be in the world, Davke, and to be Mekayim Torah Mitzvahs Lamata in the world. And we're going to see as we go along that that's a very big discipline for a spiritually elevated person, that he's got a big time in spiritual inyonim to be precisely in the world and to devote himself to making the Dvarim Gashmiyim, Kelim Telakus, and to be Megale and Mamshich Telakus in the world. Well, that's a very profound effort of Shoiv, and sometimes it's almost like a thing that a high spiritual person would want to avoid. He would like to be more devoted in some corner of the Beis HaMedrash to his inyonim, not so much to, and that includes all forms of inyonim, of a person taking on himself the effort and the yoke to go out into the world and be Megal Elikus. And nowadays, in our generation, it's in from Miftoim and other inyonim, where a mensch gives away from his own tremendous tainug eloki that he may have in all sorts of inyonim, and he devotes himself to Gila Elikus B'Teicha Olam Lamata. Well, that's a very big inyan of Shoiv, it's a very big effort, and it's a emes of Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shemayim. So we saw that that's another Yegia, B'Koyach Atzmei, which follows the Shoiv. So we've got two Yegias. First, the Yegia is the preparation, the purification of himself, that he should be Zeicha to the Inyan from Ria de Chochma. And then once the Ria de Chochma has shown him the way into the Shoiv, then we saw earlier, a few sentences earlier, that there has to be, and it's going to be discussed more length towards the end of this Maimah, the necessity to work hard in the world and to be Davke devoted to carrying out the will of the Eibishter in the Elam HaGashmi and being Megala Elikus Hila Lamata B'Teicha Olam. And we'll see that that's a considerable effort. And it could be that you have to give away what you might call your Yechudi Ilah, your feeling and your sense of what's called the Bittul Gomer of the whole world, in a form of Ein Eid Milvadei, because you've got to go down and have to do with the world, the killer, that you make it a Matthias. But in that Aveda, you reach a connection with the Kavona Pnimis and Bamela, with the Eibishter, more than you would have feel Alidei Yechudi Ilah. Well, that's a Kiddush we'll see as we go along. That's the two forms of Yegia. That he called one before the Etzem Ria, and the other as a result of the Shoiv, which comes from the Ria B'derech Milmaila, but that's really a koyach of Elikus, which is Meyal of Milmaila. So here we go now, and he goes on to say that in the Etzem Ria of the Ein HaSeichel, it's also through, you reach Ria through a Yegia. And he said, "Ve'ein ze k'moi gilui ha'avara b'hanal, shezehu ma'shenim sheb'milmayla b'derech matona, le'acha ha'shleimus b'meh shebe'efsher Liyois b'giyosei u'b'chirosei. V'kamoshen ezipur aliyah b'dibur ha'maschil Yehuda ato, or b'dibur ha'maschil vayelech ish mi beis Levi. That's the two previous mamorim here in Samavah. So what's the mavur over there? In both of those mamorim, it's mavur that when Aaron HaKohen was madlik the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Mishkan, and then his descendants in the Beis Hamikdash, when they lit up the menorah, that was like lighting up the flames and the neres, the wicks inside the neres on the menorah, with a divine with a divine yearning to go upwards, like the flame yearns upwards to Elokus. And the Alter Rebbe is Mavaya and L'Kut and Pasha Baal Eishcho. That's what the Rebbe to a certain extent bases the whole union on over here in Samavah, only in a general way. The Alter Rebbe says two forms of Ava. There's Ava which comes Mitzad Yerusha or Sinus Ker from Avraham Avinu. That's not what's written in Tanya Perek Yud Ches. Over there, the Alter Rebbe talks about the Ava Suteres, the Koch Mesiras Nefesh. But he said that Avraham Avinu also gave us a Yerusha that we can, through our Isboninus and through however, we can come to Ava. And then he calls it over there Ava Kamayim. It's like a flowing water. It's how do you call it? Careful and calm like water is. It's very fulfilling, and it comes into the Kelim, and from the Seichel it comes to Midas. And that's through his bonus and the greatness of the Eibishter, the greatness of the Olamers, similar to what he brings in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe Ahava Soilom, he calls it over there. And then he said Aaron HaKohen had another function altogether. Aaron HaKohen brought us an Ahava which was Mumaila. Aaron HaKohen brought into the Neshomas, by lighting the menorah, he brought into them an Ahava which is not with their own power to reach. It's called an Ahava Rabbo, which is Nimshuk no Maila. That's a whole big sugya to really understand that Ava. It's not the place in this class to get too involved in it. But in Tanya and Perek Mem Gimel, the Alter Rebbe talks about two inyonim of Ava. He talks about Ava Rabbo and Ava Soilom. And he said Ava Soilom is what you can come to on your own, because you take it from the world and the greatness of the creation. And then there's Ava Rabbo, which is Nimshach Milmaila. But over there he calls it Ava B'tanugim. If you look up, you'll see that he uses the word Ava Rabbo, and then he's Ava B'tanugim. And we've seen here in our Hemshech and others also, it's brought down other Drushim, that Ava B'tanugim is a very special type of Ava. And what is called Ava Rabbo, Stam in other places, and so this is not necessarily Ava B'tanugim. So that's a little bit of a sugya. Why does the Alter Rebbe Tanya is very, very tricky. Tanya is unbelievable and amazing to what the Alter Rebbe is really hinting at in many occasions is very tantalizing. What he's after, most unbelievable ends over there. For reasons known to the Alter Rebbe, he calls over there the Ava Rabba Ava B'tanugim. But in Torah Eira, in Parsha Vayichi, which is around about these type of parshas where we are here, over there the Alter Rebbe writes that even though in Tanya he said that it's Ava B'tanugim, there's really another Ava Rabba on its own right, which is not necessarily Ava B'tanugim. And that's what we're talking about here. And he said that's called Ava Rabba, unlimited Ava, an Ava which is not based on our own limitations, but koyach our own koyches hanefesh. No, that's Ava which comes Be'ike mitzad the shorosh haneshama l'mayla. The neshama is in oil misalien in dolk in the Eibishter, and maybe even l'mayla mizeh, maybe even mamish mitzad atzma sein seif. He gives down as like a form of a gift, a type of Ava which is unlimited and it has no limitation, stays with a person. It doesn't just sort of fade away like this other Ava which you produce with your own Isboninus. That's called Ava Rabba. And you know, in the Veda of the Aaron HaKohen, that was when he lit the menorah, he was mamshik that Ava to every neshama. So you might say, well, why don't we all take off with Ava Rabba? You know, every day Aaron was lighting the menorah, we should all be taking off with Ava Rabba, because like we saw, you got to have a preparation for it. If you just if you're just walking around like an Evan Daimim, that you're not going to feel, you're not going to necessarily feel the Ava Rabba. Maybe you do in certain seconds, in certain ways. And that's what he points out over there in Vayelech Ish, that previous moment, the one over there in Yehuda Ator, that there's what's called Ha'Yisoireres, and then there's the Avodah of Ava. Ha'Yisoireres is that Aaron HaKohen sends down and wakes up everybody. That's particularly in the morning, that people are supposed to wake up with tremendous brain, jump out of bed with tremendous energy, with the Ava Rabba, they feel the Davis is mamshich on everybody on Ava Rabba in the early hours of the morning, and everybody feels this tremendous desire to be committed to the Eibushter. They don't know themselves why it's just this tremendous, and that's called Isairas Ava Rabba. So the Rebbe writes that everybody can get that. But not everybody keeps it. It sort of counts, and then if I tell you, man, just get to the yeshiva, and he already crowds down a bit. All of a sudden he gets a teretz, right? Today he can't put too much effort into it, this and that, and it gradually tends to move away or quieten down, unless the mensch really makes kelim an effort to keep that ava, that ishiras of Ava. And then the Rebbe said there's what's called an avodah b'chinas Ava Rabba, that somebody who does make an effort to keep it and who's worked on himself a lot before, then that is remains in him and it becomes his own, like in a way his own avodah. He's actually able to serve the Eibushter with that Ava, and then it never leaves him. He feels that the whole time and the whole day, hour in and hour out, he's sort of devoted and cloven with this tremendous, unlimited type of Ava called Ava Rabba.
That's even before he gets to Riyas HaChochmah.
Huh?
That's even before he gets to Riyas.
Oh, well, we're going to see it's two different inyanim. That's an inyan from Midas, it's inyan from Ava, which comes from Maila, and the inyan from Riyas HaChochmah is Alidei HaSeichel. It's a Madregan Seichel, not in Ava. You follow? And all it can bring to is Shoiv, but the Ava you have to use Mikyu and Achel. You follow? This is the inyan from Riyas HaChochmah is an achievement inside the Moichid. That's what he's going to say now. Amami, right? This Ava Rabba is like a gift. So the Rebbe says, we've got a similar picture. Over here you have to work very hard and prepare yourself, and then you get Riyad HaChochmah. So he said, maybe that's similar to what we had over there. If you work very hard, then you'll have not only the Yisairas of Ava Rabba, but you'll have the actual Ava Rabba, and it'll become part of it, and you'll use it, I'll call Hayoim, Kule, I'll call Azman, and you'll be Kilu, Misairer, the Emes Ba'ava Rabba. So maybe it's similar. Maybe just like over there, you have to make a preparation. If you made the preparation and you get it and it becomes part of you, over here, if you make a preparation, then you'll have Riyad Chochmah. So what he's going to point out is that it's not similar. It's not really the same principle, even though generally it's the same principle, but it's not mamish the same principle. And he's going to say that over here with Riyad Chochmah, even though it's a very high madrega, it's possible to reach it step by step through the inyan of Seichel. Masha'kein over there, no matter how much you prepare, you don't actually work into Ava Rabba. The Ava Rabba is a gift. It remains purely a gift, and it comes in the Koach of Aaron HaKohen, where he's such an unbelievable high madrega, as he also points out over there. Aaron Kahana Rabbo, and he brings down and gives you almost like a gift as a result of, you might say, you've made the Eibushter Nachas Ruach through your Ava, and therefore he gives you this gift of Ava Rabba. Mashinkin here, you can actually work into Seichel in such a way that you can work into Riyad Chochmah, even though it's also a form of a gift. But it's like a gift that you've been zeichet to with your own avodah. Over there you've been zeichet, but it remains like a separate issue. It's a pure gift. And over here it's like a gift, which clicks in on top of all your effort.
So I have a question. If and when we get to Ava Rabba, wouldn't it fuel itself? So to speak? Fuel itself. Once, if you have this Ava Rabba all the time, doesn't it? So you want to do more, and because you do more,
more, so it keeps like it were intensifying. Yeah, it doesn't just calm down. But that's very, very hard-working people that really struggled a long time in Elikuz. And they have this Ava Rabba, mamish, called Regga, they feel it. And so therefore they feel committed to Inyonim of the Eibishter Bli Hagbolas. By them there's no messing around. It's just a commitment in the form of love. It's a feeling. It's a inyan van midah, but it's a midah which is beyond the rule of the heart, because the heart wouldn't have been able to quite contain that in its own power, but the Eibishter gives it to you that you can contain it. It's like the Bli Gvul uniting with the Gvul, and that's called Ava Rabba. So that's what we're going to do now. Briefly, we're going to compare the two, like being Zeicher, and I was going to say that they're slightly different in their character, one to the other. So he says, "Shezeu masha nimshach no maila b'derech matona, v'yacha ashleimus b'mesha be'efshel liyos b'yigiyosei u'b'chirosei." Now notice the word b'chiro. In all of these inyonim, it all depends on you. It's all dependent on the mensch, what he chooses. The word b'chira. That's a very key term, because with all these unbelievable gifts and assistances given by the Eibishter, it's ultimately dependent in your bechira. If you chose and you made a deliberate decision that this is what you're working for and this is what you want, then ultimately you'll get it, one way or another. But it's dependent in the mensch, first of all, making a bechira, and then he has to make a yigiyah. A commission is borliyil in these two Maimorim. Hari ala Ava atzmo eno shaykh yigiyah ki im bo miatzmo mil maila. He said that Ava Rabba, its very self, is not really shy that you should work hard and then you work hard into Ava Rabba. You have to work hard, and you work hard as much as you can, but it comes ki'im bo mi'atzmo mil maila. It kilo comes b'derech me'elo mi'atzmo, of its own, literally, but it's mil maila. Now that's similar to the whole thing that we find that after the Avodah of Sfiras Ha'ima, for example, in the days after Pesach, working towards Shavuos, then the mensch has to do everything he can milmata l'mayla to prepare himself, and then it's written that on Shavuos night the Torah is given milmayla l'mata, even which is beyond the power of the mensch klal to reach that. But if he hadn't made all the effort before, then he's not able to really be zeicher to that giving of the Torah. It's a similar idea. It comes milmayla and miatzmo. It comes what looks to be almost b'derech mil. The Meila, almost of itself, it happens, but it's only alidei aribu yigiyah on the part of the Adam prior to that, and you can't really say that he earned that or he got that far. He prepared the ground, and then he's given this amazing gift. That's the Ava Rabba. Ava, he said, bechinas riyas ein aseichel. He said, this union of the seeing of the eye of the mind, that's what we're calling here riyah de chokhmah. Vayishamtus de Chochma, and the emes of the emes of Chochma, Hishamtus, the making itself emes. In other words, when you see something, it just becomes so clear how true it is, because you see it. It's a form of self-truification of the immensity. Just becomes dovek in the truth and the obviousness of the. It's like he says to another person, "What you don't see it? It's so clear." Yeah, the Riyas Ein Aseichel V'Samtus to Chochma, Zeu Gufa Bo Alidei Yigiyah, through an effort, V'Aish Kashrus Daitoi Ba'amocha Yesera Be'inyan. He said it comes through a lot of effort and through a binding up of his mind, of his das, Ba'amocha Yesera Be'inyan, through a profundity, extra profundity. Yeah, because Yesera meaning additional, tremendous hamoka in the inyan. U'b'moki machem avua, shezo alidei agdomas hasogas hashnila, v'yediyas hafloa, ad shebo alidei hakore b'muz dov hanifa. Okay, so here we see that we're bordering very closely now on language which tends to throw our mind in the direction of Das. And that's what you mentioned the other night, the Indian of Das. And in a couple of lines, we're all of a sudden we're going to have to make that comparison and that equalization of the two. So, because the Rebbe says, how do you get to that Riyah de Chochmah? He said that through binding yourself over with a depth, and he said that's called daite. Now those Lashonas, the Alter Rebbe in Perek Gimel in Tanya calls the Koyach HaDaas the expression of binding over to oneself, is kashrus, he used that expression over there. And the word hamoka, profundity, is also brought in Chassidus, that's one of the characteristics of Das. The Das is the ability of the neshama to become involved in the inyan, for the power of the mind actually, to become involved in the inyan and to sort of dig into it deeper, not so much broadening the understanding and knowing more details, but in those details that you already have, to try and see their profundity and the depth of what they imply. And that's called hamoka. And that's got often to do with the Moyach HaDaas. But we haven't mentioned the Moyach HaDaas yet, we're still dealing with Chochmah. So he says that that's through a binding of himself over and through a deepening of himself in the matter. Now, in order to broaden the whole discussion, he now gets onto another inyan, which we had earlier, the inyan of Asogas HaShlila v'Yediyas HaFloa. But we're going to see that that is talking about one aspect of the Riyah de Chochmah, not necessarily all of it. That's a slightly higher madrega. And that's what he says about Mokim Acher Mavua, Shezeu Alidei Hakdomas Asogas HaShlila v'Yediyas HaFloa, Ad Shebo Alidei HaKoreh B'Mahus Dova HaNifla. והחילוק עם הריה הוא באלוקות שבו בבחינת הסלבשוס באילומס ושייך בזה הסוגה ממש, and then he's going to put in the whole brackets, and then we're going to see, well, not the whole brackets, but in brackets, and we're going to make a difference between that or whether his asoga is in the elikus, which is lamaila mi slabshus ba'ilamas. And so the nafkamina here is, in what aspect of elikus is he being misbeine? In what aspect of elikus is he devoting himself? So therefore he said that in another place we talk about Riyah de Chochmah being preceded by Alidei Hakdomas Asogas HaShlila v'Yediyas HaFloa. The negative, the appreciation by way of negativity, v'Yediyas HaFloa, the knowledge and the appreciation of the wondrousness and the withdrawalness of elikus, Ad Shebo Alidei HaKoreh, until he comes to a profound recognition, b'Mahus Dova HaNifla, in the very essence of the thing which is withdrawn or mufla. V'achiliku, and the difference is, im ariya I be'elakusha bo b'chinas islabshus ba'ilamas. The difference between the two general ideas is as to whether his whole busyness is more with elakusha bo b'chinas islabshus, with the divinity that comes into entry into the ilamas, v'shayach b'zeh hasoga mamish, and you can have mamish hasoga in that, she'esh b'zeh gam kein hasoga sa'inim v'riyas hamahus, but you can have in that also the hasoga, and then the riyah de chochmah, riyah, the seeing of the essence of it. And the way you come to riyah is that your makashi, your das, into the inyan. However, v'kasher ariyah iboyer nisev shel hamayla mi'ishtaushlas v'slabshus ba'ilamas tzorich liyah is tchila asogas hashlila v'yediyas hafloa v'akoreh b'mahus hadova v'yachachach bo b'chinas riyas amahus. So we see then that there are two inyanim. If you're dealing with elikus, with a level of divinity which comes into the elements and enters all the elements and enters all the kelim, and is machaya the Eilamas b'derech, how would you call, kiruv to the Eilamas, and gives them place and is mislavish in them. Then you can have a inif and a soge. It's possible to be masik that level of Elokus because it's come down lefi eret to nivroim, and therefore it's possible to have a soge. And therefore, alidei, the inyan of continuous binding of yourself over to that asoge, then you come to a inyan of Riyas Mahus, Riyas HaChochma. How did you get to that? Through Ishkashrus Daitibuin, that you bind yourself over inseparably to it the whole time. But it's a lower level in Elokus, which is already sharp to the Elamas, and since it's sharp to the Elamas, you can have in that an understanding, and you can bind yourself over to it, and you continuously reflecting in it, and its kilo becomes a level of Riyasama. It's almost like seeing the very essence of it. Or the other possibility, like we began the earlier sentence, that it's dealing with the Ein Sof, which is beyond entry into the elements. The Inyan von Ein Sof, how he is higher and beyond the elements altogether, and that's called the Inyan von Elokus Shel Maila Mishtaushlas, Vislabshas. So in that, first of all, Tzodik Liyesh Tchilo Asogas Ashlila. There you can't be masik that Elokus. Elokus which comes according to you and comes in a kiruv to the Nivroim and it enters them, there you can understand it because it's come in a way of approaching you almost. Over where we're talking about Elokus which is beyond the elements and beyond the whole Inyan and Ishtaushlas elements, no, the Etzem Inyan and Elokus, then you can't be masik that. All you can be masik is that you're not masik. You keep saying, oh yes, I appreciate this and this, but that is not this. And that's what we call a sogasa ashlila. In other words, you don't really appreciate a thing directly, but you negate from it what you already know. In other words, what you know is only a lower level, and you say this is incomparably higher than that, and you keep going upwards, and that's called negatory hasoga, or hasogas ashlila, the hasoga of the negation. And you keep going up higher and higher. In that, the Rebbe says that through that, you can come to a certain recognition, he calls it hakora, in the inyan of the mahus ha'aflua. In other words, that you can begin to appreciate, you can't appreciate Elokus in such a level, but you can appreciate just how far and how separate and how wondrous that is compared to what you can appreciate. In other words, you compare almost the two levels in Elokus. And what you can have a hakora and a recognition, almost in the form of a riyas amahus, is in the difference between it and, but not directly in that level. You can't be masik that level, but you can be masik somewhat and almost in a mahustic way how withdrawn that is from the level that you do have a close hakora, and that's called the inyan von mahus ha'aflua. In other words, you have an appreciation of just how separate the Shelamayla Mishtaushlas is, even though you can't actually directly describe that, but you can come to some recognition just how far away it is, and that's called the inyan von the aflua. And you can have a hakora b'mahusa, although you can have a hakora in the mahus of that haflua. And then you come to the inyan von riyas hamahus. So here we notice that when the Rebbe used the expression that the riyah is in the Ein Sof, how he is l'mayla mishtaushlas, v'slabshes, then he said there has to be this hasogas ashlila by continuously going higher and negating from the Ein Sof what you already know to be the Ein Sof v'slabshes. And then you come to a hakora b'mahus hadova. Now I use the word hakora. Now that we didn't use always such an expression. But the word hakora means recognition. You say about somebody, ani makiroto, I recognize him. So that's got in itself two inyonim. On the one hand, it's got in that your connection with him is not something just 15 years, but you've had connection with him before, and therefore you say, I know him, ani makiroto, which means not that I know him. In Hebrew it's a different word. In English you say I know him. It's like the ordinary word for knowing. But it doesn't mean knowing, it means like a recognition of him. And that means a deeper and more profound connection that's already been established between you. In other words, that the word hakora is indicatory of a connection which is not purely seichel at all. It's like a knowledge and an awareness one to the other, but it's a very deep thing, because if you say ani makir et zeh, or I have a hakora in that person, or I have a hakora in that particular Indian, then you mean you have a certain sympathy and connection which is beyond time and space. You say, I recognize that matter. Therefore, it's brought down in Siddhis that you recognize things which you, from way back, you had a connection with them, beloved. And therefore, so it's true that this power to what we call recognize is also based on the very essence of the soul, which is connected to Etzem Elokus anyway. So therefore, when you start talking about things which are higher than Ishlapshus in the world, higher than Ishtalshalas, then you're touching off into the Etzem. Therefore, there's a deep power inside the mensch which awakens itself, and he says, I know about this. Ani makir. It's in him. So therefore, the Rebbe says, when you're talking about Elokus Bishlapshus, there you talk about Asoga. And you say that the type of iskashus into the Mahus Adova, which is Riyah the Chochmah, or that's kilu a proportionate Indian that follows from the effort, and you come to Riyah, because that's Elokus, which is close to you, and therefore you can come to appreciate it. Over the Elokus, which is L'mayla Mislapshus, what wakens up there is the Hasoga Shashlila, and they're saying it's not that, and it's not that, and it's beyond my grasp, it's really beyond, but I get some appreciation how far it's beyond. Well, that touches off a very deep koyach, which makes you aware. You know what you say, you almost recognize that level without really being able to be masik it, because you can't. Oh, but that's sufficient kesher pnimi to wake up this riyah de chokhmah. It touches off this form of riyah. So now we're going to see in this bracket that the Rebbe is now going to bring up the point that l'chora, if you use that word hakora, then the word hakora is used in other places. It's beneged to das. And like we just saw, there's certain traces here with das. Ishkashras is one of the functions of das, and other languages which have occurred here in these sentences. But we're talking the whole time here about Riyah de Chochmah. But you're using such expressions which look like Inyanim and Das. And therefore we're going to have to come to terms, how does this relate to the Inyanim and Das? So that's what we're about to do. So therefore he says that Adidei, that Inyanim and Shasogas Shlila, V'yediyas HaFloa, V'hakora b'mawusadol. And that leads you to a recognition. So I mean, how on earth can you say you're makir the mahus of Elokus, which is a maila mislapsis? But that's what we call hakora. Hakora is that you're like aware of it. For example, to give you an example of that, the Gemara brings a Masechta Nedarim, a very amazing thing. Where the Gemara says that Avraham Avinu, when he was 3 years old, he already knew about the Eivishter, even though it hadn't been Matan Torah yet, but the whole thing. It's written, Ben Sholei Shonim Hikir Avraham Avinu es Boy Roy Hikir. He recognized the Eivishter. So it's brought down on the Siddhis that said power of Avraham Avinu being as he was, Neshama Datzilas Ilamata. He, when he was only 3 years old, he already felt he had this connection, that he was aware, and he sort of woken up to something that he knew from before, and that's called Hakora. So the same thing here, that Yediyas Ashlila brings us to a Hakora, to an appreciation of something that we know mitzad our etzem. So that was and that leads to Riyah de Chochmah, Riyah Samos. Yesh loima, the inin Riyahs eina seichel, hu lamayla me'akora shezeu b'das. In other words, now the Rebbe's come out clearly that when we use the word hakora, l'chora we're talking about das. And we're saying that leads into Riyahs eina seichel, and that's Chochmah. So I mean, Chochmah and Das are quite distant one from the other. They're not the same thing. So how do they fit together? So the Rebbe says, even though we've used expressions here which are shayach to Das, nonetheless, the ultimate aim here is Riyah de Chochmah. So So the reason that we've been saying Hakora, because we're talking about something that's not shy to understanding, it's a deeper connection and a deeper awareness and like recognizing more than okay. Mikro Mokim, so therefore we use the word Hakora, because we're talking about Elikus Shalamalami, our elements, and therefore you can't really be masking that, and therefore we say you're aware of it, you sense it, you realize that you have some kesher with that from way back. That's called Hakora. And he says that that's a inyan which is Lamayla Mi'asoger. Mikol Mokim, Lamayla Mizeh, B'chinas Riyas, Ein HaSeichel, She'i Santus de Chochma, Shezeu Yosef B'Mahus Ve'etzem HaDover, Sheshneim Hein B'Mahus HaDover. Mikol Mokim, B'chinas Riyah, Hi Yosef B'Mahus Ve'etzem HaDover, Mei HaKorah. That's a very important little. It's good to put this away in your pocket of your memories, because later on when you're learning these things move around a lot. Riyah, the Chochma, Hakora, the Das, Hakora, Samahus, and all these in your. So here the Rebbe says a very fascinating definition. And he says that the Inyan and Das is a lower level, because Das is already after Chochma, after Bina, then Das comes into play. And Das is this very powerful ability to touch off a connection with the Yetim, and that's called recognition, Hakora. And so you're only makir something which is mitzad its essence. You're not makir something just purely because of a ha'or of that thing. But you're makir in the, like when you say you're makir somebody, you don't mean you know his hat or his, or a pilpul that he wrote or something. You know the etzem person. You know him, the etzem, you say, I have Hakora in this person. So that was it. The Rebbe Emes Das is this Indian of connecting beyond the Soga with the very essence of the thing. However, he said Riyah the Chochma is even higher. Riyah the Chochma is what he calls the Samtus the Chochma. He keeps calling it the Emeskite, the making Emeskite, which is in Chochma. He said, it's even more in the very Mahus and Etzem Adova. Sheshneim ein b'Mahus Adova. Mikol Mokim Prince Ariyah hu Yosef b'Mahus ve'etzem Adova mei HaKorah. Ki, why is that? Ba'Korah yesh b'zeh negias ha'seichel. V'aynu ma she'aseichel makir hadovo. Lo ma she'aseichel masig, ki ma she'makir. B'Mahus Adova. Mikol Mokim me'achas shezeu ma she'aseichel makir, ein ze be'etzem mam. Avo b'riyah de Chochma, ein ze tarivus negiyas sichlias klau. V'harei ze magiyah b'Mahus ha'etzem mam. Philip. So the Rebbe said, Emes, Das is in its pneumius and in its real makeup, Das is not Seichel, it's Hakora. But he said there's a touch of Seichel about it. There's a Negiyah, there's a certain leaning and a certain proneness to Seichel in Das. And therefore, what happens in that Hakora, that recognition and awareness in Das, well, that's how the Koyach HaSeichel has got an ability to be aware and to feel, but it's in the Seichel. And therefore, you'll notice in all the Jerusalem Chassidus, when we talk about the Inyan and Moyach Hadas, it's called Moyach Hadas. It's shied to the Moyach, and it's shied to the Moyach, how the Moyach functions as Seichel. But it's the power of the Seichel to be aware and to feel. And therefore, all the meters really come through Das, because you begin to feel the matter in the Seichel, but you don't just feel it, you feel it because you're, as it were, aware of it, you become awakened in your recognition of the matter. So that was very profound. Everything goes hamoke. It's got to do with depth and with profundity. But Sokosov, it's a power in the Seichel. Chochma, Bina, Das are three different levels in Seichel. And therefore, your Seichel assisted you to come to that, and in a way it's your Seichel that's being aware. And it's a special power that you're able to put into the Seichel. Mashenkin, he says, Chochma, so you can tie it to Chochma is also Seichel. Chochma is also one of the three powers of the Moyach. And here we come to Riyah. What's the difference between that and that? He said, no, Chochma is a Riyah in the Etzem Mahus Ador. Doesn't have anything to do with Seichel. Ain't was there Tariv. Doesn't even have a mixture of Seichel at all. Ve'ilu das has got a certain trace of seichel. Therefore, it's almost like the seichel itself being makir. Aber the real the chokhmah is the etzem ability of the nefesh, with the ain of the seichel to see. You call it ain ha-seichel. So the Rebbe said, yeah, but it's more ayin than it is seichel. So here we see a pivoting desire that even though the inyan from chokhmah is one of the three moichim, but the pnimius at the highest level in chokhmah is called riyah. That's got nothing to do with seichel. It's a power and an ability to literally go out of seichel altogether and enter into the very essence of the thing and to be involved in it, like what you might call etzem to eter, one essence to the other, and that's called riyah. Higher than that you can't have it. That's what's called riyah. Well, if he said for us that chokhmah is the most amazing power, and like I've quoted on numerous occasions that the inyan of from my mashpia that he said that the ikar of all chassidus Chabad is chokhmah. If you can have some idea what chokhmah is about, you can know most of the secrets of chassidus Chabad. Because here we see that chokhmah is real. Before we saw the pnimis avahu pnimis atik. Everywhere you go, you seem to meet up with chokhmah, and it seems to be the most amazing. And over in the Perek Lamed Hey, in Tanya, and the Hagur, a little Hagur at the bottom of the second page, the Alter writes over there that he heard from the Maggid, Shemaiti Mimoiri, that the chokhmah hu ravadi ve'ein shirose zu hi madreges ha-chokhmah. Wait, the chokhmah. Ein oid levade, there's a level of chokhmah. Everywhere you go, you seem to meet up with the most unbelievable madreges, and they all somehow or another get into chokhmah. Yeah, so, because we see that chokhmah is not really seichel. It's the leading power within seichel. It's the beginning which will feed you into seichel, but chokhmah is not really seichel. It's kilo seichel, but it's not seichel klal. And that's the inyan of koyach ma. So it's a koyach, but its whole inyan is ma. And ma is bittul. That's another thing that wherever you go in Chassidus, you'll find that the key to everything is bittul. Therefore, chokhmah's got both of them. Chokhmah's got all these unbelievable gifts to it, but it's got the biggest bittul that could possibly be. And as we're going to see as he goes on towards the end of the Maimah, the bittul from chokhmah is not stam bittul. The bittul from chokhmah is what's called hanochas hatzmusei, the putting of the self aside altogether. The self doesn't exist anymore. It's only the emes exists. Hu levade ve'ein zu. Well, nothing else apart from him. And in other words, that the type of bittul that you reach when you go into the pnimis of chokhmah is you gain this unbelievable elixir of putting yourself out of the picture. You don't exist anymore, even though you do. It's you that is, you'll come up to this high, you say, oh no, אני לא פה, רק הוא לבד ואין זו. Ein zu. I say, if you come to that, then you can open up your eyes and you can see everything. The whole world becomes another inyan. You see mahusar. You see everything in a different way completely. And he said, higher than that doesn't exist. That even the akora in das, like every that, is not to be compared. Even though akora in das are very deep in, but he said it still has a certain trace of seichel. It's like the seichel saying, oh yeah, I'm so convinced sichli of this thing, I see it and I recognize it, I'm connected, and a bit of the etzem also. Over here, you don't exist, you've gone altogether away, you come to a complete foregoing of yourself altogether, and you just say, oh, hine, Elokeinu zeh, this is it. And you still remain an Hashom and a Guf. You don't just go out and fly into the air. And that's the union of koyach. That's what it means, the word koyach. It still remains together with ma. It's still somehow or another an existing entity. It's still there, but at the same time, in other words, it's the meeting of the impossible and the possible. It's the meeting of ein oid novade with the union of the existing still in the world. That's what the Alter Rebbe said. He couldn't figure that unless he heard it from the Maggid. I heard from the Maggid, then he'll give it over to you. He'll tell you that's what he heard from the Maggid. That the impossible and the possible linked together, that's Chokhmah. And that's, you can only hear that. And we told you once, it is written in the Kisvei Arizal. When I get to Pnimi, we said at the beginning of Parsha Vayishlach, Pnimi Saba, who Pnimi is Atik. That Rabbeinu Chaim Vital heard that from the Arizal. And he said, Shemaiti mi moiris al. He said to me, the Pnimis Ava Yerev, the Nikmas of Pnimis Ava. He says, Velo yodati atam. I didn't know what was the reason. He said, I'm only giving out what I heard. So I don't know why that is. How that can be. But it's the same principle. You can only hear that from the Arizal. You can't really know it and say it unless you heard it from higher up, as they say. In other words, that's the Indian of Chokmah. Vamela said that it'll be higher than Re'iyah the Chokmah, as they say in the old Ungarische Yiddish, gibt nicht. It doesn't give any, it's not for sale. Anything higher than that, Mitzad the Odom, that's the highest thing you can read. That's even higher than the Inni from Hakora Mitzad Da. There's not even a mixture of any touch of a sichlius cloud. It's much brighter and much more obvious. He said, therefore, he said that's much more in the form of Behiras Etzloi. He said, Raksha Behi Santus, in the Santus of Chokmah, Meir Etzloi Oira Atzmi Yoisa Miba HaKorah. Well, Hefer, he said, Betfisis, Bekli Hamoichin, Arize Papochus, Mi Inyan HaKorah. Ishleima, Dalayaha HaKorah, Bolidei Santus. There was the Rebbe. I must admit that there's just one little piece of that sentence that I find a little bit mystifying. So the way I understand it is, what the Rebbe said, Lochein harizei yeshiv b'pchinas behiras etzloi, raksha b'yisamtus, meir etzloi atzmi. Maybe he's referring back to Hakora, and he said the yin from Hakora is maybe brighter, and it's more uniform, because since it's got to do with your seichel, then it appears a brighter thing. He said, but in the Isamtus, what that means, Riyah de Chochmah, Meya Etzle Oyer Ha'atzmi Yoisa, Miba HaKorah. Because it's much from the Hemshah, the sentence that he's talking about, he's going back to HaKorah. So therefore he said, in HaKorah there can be a Behirus. Or he said, in Riyah de Chochmah, it's the very essence of the Emes, Kemoishu Mitzad Elakus, Mitzad the Emes. It's the Emes, Mitzad the Emes Mamish. Yeah, therefore it's a Oyer Atzmi. It's more the Oyer of the Etzem of the Eibishter, more than what in HaKorah. Ula Hefer, he said, and the other way around, but Tfisa B'Klei HaMoichin, but if we go the other way, when you're toy for something, mamish in the kelim of moichin, then it's less than the inyan from HaKorah. Now what does he mean by that? When you're toy for something in bina or even in chokhmah on the lower levels, and you mamish get a tfisa in it and you see it very clearly, but that's purely seichel. That's really what we call tfisa seichel. So he said that's less than HaKorah, but that's the other way around. That's at the other end. So we've got like all extremities now. We've got the inyan from tfisa be'in be'koyach ha'seichel be'derech ha'rogil. That's less than HaKorah. Then you go up into HaKorah. Oh, but once you get into HaKorah, that like Gabi Emerson, Riyah Samahuz, is also a lower level. So we've got tfisa be'klei hamoichin, in the very essence of the understanding. Well, that's lower than HaKorah. HaKorah is higher than that, and that's das. Of Nisantus of Riyah de Chokhmah is higher. Yeshleima Daliyaha HaKorah Bo Lidaya Isamtus. Isamtus means Riyah de Chokhmah, the Emerskite, that once you go to HaKorah, then you can move up into. So first of all, you have to have the Tfisa B'Klei HaMoichin. You've got to understand clearly what you're talking about. After that, you go up into the HaKorah, which is Mitzad Da'at, and then you go up even higher into Riyah, Mitzad Riyah de Chokhmah, and that's called Hisamtus. So here we keep seeing that the Rebbe keeps linking the word Hisamtus with Riyah de Chokhmah. And when we say Hisamtus, it's like a what do you call it, a reflexive word. It's like reflecting back. In other words, it's not that you understood the Emes, but it's that the emes is ma'ir into you. In other words, that you become emes mitzad the inyan itself, mitzad Elokus itself makes its emes become part of you. Hakora is you recognizing that emes, but it hasn't mamish become revealed into you yet, because you're still under the influence of seichel, but in a very high and pnimis and deep way. But when you move from that into Riyah the Chokhmah, then the emes has taken you. Not you've taken the emes, but the emes has completely conquered you. And that's what the Alter Rebbe said in Perek Lamed Hey, in the Agora. He says that the union from Chokhmah is, what he writes over there, it's Echad Ho-Emes. It's the union from Echad, how it is Mitzad Emes. That's the emes of Elokus. And that's the union from Hu Ravade Ve'enzu. And that's Meir into the union from Chokhmah. You make more emes than that you can't have. More emes that really there's nothing, and only the Eibush, that's the emes of all the emeses. That becomes your emes, that lights into you in a way that you see it and you become completely batel, despite the fact that the union from Hakora, the Das has got mindless, that you have a very bright reaction, but in the union from Nisamtus to Chokhmah, it's not so much a bright reaction, it's that you're so not there anymore that you just sort of become completely swept up into the emes mitzad Elokus mamish. Mamela, therefore you see the etzem adova in a zamin even that you just lose yourself altogether. Mamela, this is that's an amazing principle. So here we see once again a preparation before that, which working very hard with Soga. Then you come into Das, Hamoke, Hakora, and then from that you move up into an even higher level, which is completely Riyah Samahus, and that's no longer your Avodah, that's no longer your Yagiyah. That's really, like you said before, that's really an oil mill might.
So all these three things, the Tefisa, Das, and Riyah, they're all bittul completely?
Yeah, they're all bittul. Oh yes. If you have a Korah mitzad Das, particularly in the union from Hasogas Hashlila, then you're bottled b'matzias, my son. When I say bottled b'matzias, I mean, but we'll see as we go along that the Rebbe doesn't want you to be bottled b'matzias. He wants you to know that there's bittul b'matzias, but he wants you to be a matzias in a very special way. In other words, once again, Chassidus teaches you that you're bottled b'matzias, but it doesn't let you say, oh, if I'm bottled b'matzias, there's nothing, and I'm nothing, and nothing exists. Mela is just only the Eibishter, Shalom Al-Soil, on the country. So I just want you to be a very, very take of Matthias, and you have to be in the world, and you got to say things, and you got to do things. But you got to know that you're doing that as a Shaliach. You're doing that as a Shaliach, Havein Mel. That's a whole concept. That's what the Rebbeim taught us, and the Rebbe, Allah Mashiach. But a chosed is a shliach. A chosed is a shliach. So there we are. Okay.